Welcome back. So in the last section, we talked a lot about JavaScript arrays and how useful they are and what they do. So now we're going to have a look at another data structure called the object. So in this section, first of all, we're going to see what objects are, why we use them, and then we're going to have a look at how to create an object. Then we're going to learn how to reach particular data from an object. And as you know, in arrays, we use square brackets. Then we're going to see how to update an object. And finally, we're going to learn how to store data in an object. So I'll go to my code editor and we're going to write some code. How about that? First of all, why do we need an object instead of an array? I know, it's an overwhelming question. I heard it rattling around in your head. So why don't we just start with that? Suppose that I want to model a single student in JavaScript. So let's create a variable called student. I'll say var student. Now each student has a name and a school and an age. So there's a lot of different ways that I could do that. I could have 3 different variables, name, school, and age, but they're not related to one another, right? You see that? They're totally separate. So if I wanted to connect them, I could use an array like this. Var student is equal to array where the first item, well, that's the name Sheldon. The second item is age 36, and the last item is school, Caltech. Now, this is not really a great use of an array because this data is not really a list. So yeah, we can force it into an array, but it doesn't really lend itself to the format of an array, where we have lists that often have logical order. So basically, there really isn't a logical order here, right? So let's say that we wanted to create another student. So I'll say student 1 to this one. And here I'll say var student 2 is equal to an array, but this time, let's make the order of the items different. So I'll say 35 as the age is the first item, and the second item is MIT for the school, and the last item will be Leonard. Okay, so now let's say that we want to access the school of the students. And in order to access the school out of this first student, I would need to write student 1 bracket 2. And that requires me to know what the school is at index 2. Now, in the second array, if I want to reach to that school again, now I had age at index 0, school at index 1, name at index 2. Then if I try to access student 2 to bracket 2, I get name instead of school. So I'd need to say student 2 bracket 1 to reach the school. So this is all just to show you that an array is not the perfect solution for every situation. Yes, we use arrays to store a list of data generally. Okay, so let's comment these out. Now, there is a much better data structure for us to use here, which is the JavaScript object, which is my point from the beginning. So, first, we're going to see how we can create an object. And of course, there are a couple of different ways to create an object. First method is, I'll just say var student equal to new object, then parenthesis. Okay, so right now we've created an empty object. And after that, if I want to add an item to that object, I can say student dot, and after that, the name of the property that I want to add. But that's not the method that we're going to use very often. So I'm going to comment out these lines for now. And let's have a look at our second method. It's curly braces. So I'll say var student equal to curly braces. Because remember, in arrays, we use square brackets. This time, in an object, we're going to use curly braces. So now we're going to start to add properties to this object. So objects take properties, and these properties are key value pairs. So every item in an object is a key value pair. So our first property, let's say it is name. And then we use colon, and then value is Sheldon. And after that, we'll put a comma to separate the key value pairs. Now the second property is age, so its value is 36. And we'll call the third property school, and its value will be Caltech. All right, so we have now just created an object, and in it we have three different properties, name, age, and school. So we have three different slots in this object. And it's really important to note that objects don't have any built-in order, unlike an array, right, where there's a first item and a second item and a third item, etc. So you've got to think of the items inside of a given object as just floating around inside of there, like, I don't know, electrons or something. No, that would also imply an order. Anyway, there is no order, only chaos. No property, in other words, no property comes first or second, and it doesn't matter how I declare them or in what order, because they're all treated the same, okay? So actually, we store Sheldon under the key name. 36 is stored under the key age, and Caltech is stored under the key school. So like I said, the order in the object doesn't matter. So I can cut this age and paste it here and then put a comma here. See, so there's no difference. Okay, now that we've got that out of the way, let's see how to retrieve data from an object. And if you recall, in arrays, we had to know the index of the element that we wanted to reach. So we used square brackets. Now with objects, we've got a couple of different choices here. We can either use the name of the object, so student, square brackets, and then the name of the key. So in this case, I'm getting Sheldon out of the student object. So I'll write student square brackets name in quotes. Now let's just print this out in the console so you can see it. I'll write console.log and inside of it this statement. So I'll save all this, go to the console. And here, when I refresh the page, we'll see Sheldon. Great. So go back to the code. So as you can see, we don't have to know the index of the element. All right, so the other option is to use dot notation. Dot notation. It's a little bit shorter and simpler. I'll show you an example right here. So I'll write student.school, and school has to match, obviously, the name of the key. And that will also give us Sheldon. So I'll save this, go to the console. And yeah, so when I refresh the page, we see our school. Okay, so now let's go back to the code. Now it's up to you to use either one. I prefer, thanks for asking, to use dot notation because it's shorter. You don't have to use quotes, and you don't need double brackets on either side. You just need a dot. But of course, there are a few differences. So here, let's check out three of the main differences. So you cannot use dot notation if the property starts with a number. So if I say one school here, then I won't be able to use dot notation. But if I had a property called one school, I would have to use square brackets, put it in quotes, and that's just because that's the way it's set up in JavaScript. So another difference is you can't use dot notation if your property name has a space in it, like school and space and name. All right, so obviously that doesn't work. JavaScript basically thinks we're accessing dot school. So we don't use spaces while giving names to properties, okay? Now, the last difference is that you can look things up using a variable if you use bracket notation. So if I have a variable here called school name, so I'll write in here var school name, and it's equal to school in quotes. So at that moment, I'll store the property name in a variable, and if I want to reach out this property value, let's first comment out these lines, save this, go to the console. Here I'll refresh, clean the console, and we'll go back to the code again. And if I try to do student.schoolname, it'll just look for the property school name. But if I do student square bracket school name, it's going to evaluate school name, which gives us school in quotes. So this will then look up the school property in the student object. So this is actually something that we will see occasionally. So that's why it's worth knowing the difference here. And now you do. You can use square bracket notation using a variable name to reach a property. So let's see this in console. I'll write console.log, and inside of it, this statement. Save this and go to the console, and here we can see Caltech again. And we'll go back to the code. All right. So like I said, you can use square bracket notation using a variable name to reach a property. Valuable knowledge. Okay, so why don't we take a quick pause right here, and we'll continue in the next section. You will not be disappointed.